I do believe that BYU has found its new basketball coach, and that basketball coach comes from Utah, and not just the state of Utah, which feels pretty obvious when we talk anything BYU coaching search, but Utah University. And University of Utah? I should learn that soon. Chris Burgess, Utah assistant, former BYU assistant, has risen as maybe the top candidate for Tom Holmoe and company. And I like this hire a lot because of what I hear Matt Norlander and other major college football pundits say about Burgess. There is not a world where BYU goes out and gets that big name because they don't operate that way. In essence, BYU wouldn't go after a Nate Oates. BYU wouldn't say, hey, what if we could dip down and get a Sean Miller? That's just not how BYU does it. They usually go with somebody who fits the LDS brand, the LDS faith, which I think is admirable, and they win doing that. I don't mind that they stick to that formula of bringing in a guy like Chris Burgess, who you probably hadn't heard of. Utah assistant, former BYU assistant, and Norlander says he's 98% that BYU's next coach will be Barrett Peary, Alex Jensen, Kevin Young, Quincy Lewis, Cody Fugger, or Chris Burgess. And that's the guy who, after the multiple tweets that you've probably seen coming out of him really wanting the job, is likely at the top. The only thing that I've dialed in on that seems to be consensus from BYU, not consensus, but consensus from part of BYU Nation, is that this is a guy who might leave if Utah comes open. But Jeff Hansen says Burgess is the best candidate for the BYU job. BYU's process is slow. It's who they are. It's the nature of BYU, but Burgess is the right man for the job. Players, families, AAU coaches, and a bunch of others really respect him as a coach and a human. He'd kill it. Sounds like Burgess is a great human, a guy who coached under Mark Pope, who's been at BYU. And I don't know if I've seen too much pointing to him, Burgess, being a guy that would jump ship for Utah. We've seen coaches go back and forth from BYU and Utah, and coaches who have ties to both schools. Kyle Whittingham, who wants you to forget that, by the way. Jackson Payne saying sources close to the situation tell him that Utah assistant Chris Burgess is actively pursuing BYU's vacant head coaching job. Burgess is eager to return to the school where he spent 3 years as an assistant under Mark Pope. Now, he has not been a head coach. He has not led a team, not been a head coach at the Division I ranks, or led a team in the transfer portal or NIL era. That is the part that I think is not good. That is where I say, can you control the portal? But maybe the response to myself there is he understands players who are on mission. He understands the LDS faith, the church, the restraints that puts on you, and restraints might not even be the best word. This is a commitment to a brand, a culture, to ethics that does cancel some things out. Your opportunities are limited for a faith, and that to me is admirable because it holds a different standard. It's not a restraint as much as it is holding a standard. In that, Burgess understands what it's like to be at BYU. Now, I would love for Bryce Drew to be the next BYU coach. I think Bryce Drew would come in and win. And we know the guy is a morally stand-up dude. He has won a ton of basketball games at Grand Canyon. He has spent time in the region. He has NCAA tournament pedigree. He is a very good basketball coach. Not being in the LDS faith should not disqualify him from that job. I'm saying that as someone who didn't go to BYU and probably doesn't have the credential to say that, but and now Tom Holmoe, who's hired coaches at BYU who aren't members of the church, that is something that I believe the athletic department would agree with, that the coach doesn't have to be, and because Bryce Drew shouldn't disqualify him, and I think he would win a lot and right away. However, if the stipulation is you need someone who has deep ties to the university, deep ties to the faith, deep ties to recruiting in Utah, Chris Burgess is that guy. He steps in day one, brings energy, brings life. CBS writes, Burgess has the temperament and the credentials that fit the job, but he's yet to coach the D1 level. That said, it's highly probable he'd be in the Dave Rose mold. When the name Dave Rose comes up, that's when you know the candidate's probably got a good shot. As a BYU lifer, if he got the gig, Peary will get a serious look. He was previously at Portland State, went 63 and 57 in 4 seasons. Those two guys, Peary and Burgess, seem to be the ones that are right up there at the top. I think Jensen, you throw his name in there as well. The difference to me is Burgess doesn't have that weird, and even Pope at Utah Valley. it's BYU, man. They do this thing where they hire some guy who hasn't won a national championship. They hire some guy who doesn't have all these flowers, these roses in their college coaching career, and they win with them because of the culture fit. It's a very impressive thing, and it's a case study that I would love to dive deeper in that I'm sure most people don't understand about the university. So here, I think Bryce Drew is your fun option outside of the faith that would come in and win. Burgess is the right call. And I'll say today, as of Tuesday, April 16th, I think Chris Burgess is the next head coach at BYU basketball. He comes in, brings continuity, immediately goes to those who are coming back from mission and says, I want you to play here. Make sure that he keeps intact the players that want to stay and keeps the BYU brand right where it is, which is in a really good spot in basketball. Chris Burgess, welcome to Provo, back to Provo. Probably can just live in the same house that he's in right now. Come back tomorrow. We'll talk more about that and more on BYU basketball and football and the Big 12 and the stuff that we talk about on this show. Maybe even some expansion on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's not how I tag out the show. This has been it. What was that? This has been It Always Will Be. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.